Lesson 1, raise the vision from individual inclusion to changing structures. The 47 evaluations analysed for this summary found that many food systems programmes and interventions had supported the empowerment of individual women, for example, through access to microcredit or skills training, but far fewer interventions had confronted the wider systemic and structural barriers needed to tackle gender inequality at its roots. Evaluations recommend that much more attention is needed in future to programming that addresses social norms, gender-based violence, household decision-making and access to land, and inequalities embedded in laws, policies, and capacities. Lesson 2, use theories of change to connect programmatic action on the ground with institutional or corporate intent. The evaluations analysed found gaps between corporate or institutional gender policies, which often articulate more transformative visions of change, and programmatic action on the ground, which much less frequently reflected this kind of understanding. To address this, evaluations recommend articulating a very clear conceptual vision, which adopts a transformative model. What does gender mean for the organisation? And communicating this at all levels. And using theories of change to translate these visions into practical designs, implementation, and monitoring of food systems programming. Next slide, please. Lesson 3, understand local gender needs and target to context. Evaluations consistently found that food systems programming was undermined by weak or limited gender analysis. And this meant that some vulnerabilities were assumed rather than known. And in turn, that led to some inaccuracies in targeting. Limited or shallow analysis often treated women as a single homogeneous group, rather than identifying diverse gender needs in their particular environments and contexts. To tackle this, evaluations recommend much more granular analysis of structural gender inequalities in context, and also designing targeting strategies based on individuals' own articulation of their needs and what would work for them in their environment. Lesson 4, move from equal participation to engaged decision-making. Evaluations found a very common assumption that including women in food systems programming equated to changes in structural gender relations. And when evaluations were done, that assumption was found to be mistaken. To tackle this, they recommend moving to or providing opportunities to participate in decision-making structures, particularly where interventions had supported women to engage in project management structures. These showed especially strong potential to change social norms. Lesson 5, challenge stereotypes and assume women as actors. Evaluations found that some food systems programmes had inadvertently reinforced gender stereotypes. For example, functional skills training for women was often useful for individuals, but sometimes it reinforced traditional gender roles and stereotypes, such as women as caregivers. Instead, evaluations recommending checking at every stage that gender stereotypes are not created or reinforced, and avoiding them at all costs, and instead focusing on women's strengths, capacities, and their resilience as agents of change. Next slide, thank you. Lesson 6, focus on social relations to avoid backlash. Evaluations found that targeting women, often solely, was sometimes understood as addressing gender, and that this led to some missed opportunities to tackle gender equality social norms, and sometimes there was backlash where there was perceived resentment from men and boys, particularly if they felt that women were receiving special treatment in some way. To address this, evaluations recommend adopting a social relations lens, which includes men and boys and addresses intersectionalities of discrimination. They also advise creating space for dialogue between women and men and boys and girls to address the renegotiation of gender norms. For example, engaging men and boys in gender transformative nutrition and health messaging helped improve outcomes in many different countries. Lesson 7, build capacities for the future. Evaluations found that capacity strengthening activities with a transformative lens had very significant potential to address strategic gender needs and address gender inequalities from a more transformative approach. However, they also found that the demand for this often outstripped what agencies could supply, usually due to funding limitations. They recommend that where these interventions are implemented, that multi-level approaches are adopted at all layers of institutions and structures. And they recommend helping build normative frameworks to help monitor progress on structural inequalities, such as land ownership. Lesson 8, match transformative action with transformative measurement. Evaluations consistently found shortcomings in standard corporate measurement systems, which often quantified the participation of women and men in interventions, rather than analysing changes in power structures or looking at gender-based roles. They recommend rebalancing monitoring systems where possible, away from standard indicators and towards more flexible and creative mechanisms. They recommend using more diverse methods, such as case studies and participatory and qualitative research. They advise using tools which can recognise and embrace complexity and which can help measure behaviour and institutional change in the medium term. And finally, lesson 9, create alliances for change. Evaluations found significant potential in building strategic networks and alliances on gender equality, but that this potential had not been seized or maximised. They also found that where several agencies work together in synergy, the transformative effects were magnified and can be considerable. They also found that it's the combination of practices brought about by different partners working in different areas that contribute to more transformative effects and change. These 9 lessons are available in the report, which is captured on the link in this slide. Thank you, and over to Alison.
Thank you very much, Julia, for your presentation and sharing this with all of us. Excellencies and distinguished guests from around the globe, it is a privilege to be able to facilitate the next part of this pre-summit affiliated session and to hear from you. CGIAR is proud to participate in this event, focusing on the solutions that evaluative evidence offer for transforming food systems. CGIAR is a global partnership that unites organizations engaged in research for a food secure future. CGIAR's science contributes to the global reset and influences the transformation of food, land, and water systems in a climate crisis. Gender has been a cross-cutting theme of CGIAR and is a key impact area in our 2030 strategy. Gender has been addressed in many of our independent evaluations across all of these agencies. I'm thankful to Dr. Julia Betts and all of our colleagues in the Rome-based agency evaluation offices for this collaborative work to identify 9 important solutions in the evidence paper. These lessons from evaluation evidence point to transformative solutions. Naturally, these solutions resonate with CGIAR advisory services. For instance, lesson 6 is to adopt a social relations lens to avoid backlash. CGIAR evaluations reinforce how work with local communities to jointly identify and to address participation barriers have generated new spaces to build understanding between women and men. We also strongly support and warmly promote lesson 2 on using theories of change. Theories of change are a solution that links to a vision of change that is high level with doable steps. A synthesis of CGIAR evaluations that we conducted last year finds theory of change to be crucial for system transformation work. CGIAR also believes a critical element to support transformative change is food systems, and drive solutions is coordinated action across the private, public, and civil society spheres. It's for this reason that I am very pleased to invite some of our guests today to bring their comments to the floor. We also encourage, and we see it's already happening, that many participants around the globe continue to use the chat and bring those great comments forward and put them in the chat function to share your reactions. What resonates with you in the evidence paper? So now I would like to turn to remarks from the distinguished guests this evening. And first, let me say it is an honor to invite Her Excellency Ms. Alexandra Bugaliskas, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Canada to the Rome-based agencies, to take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alison.
The floor is yours.
All right. It's really nice to be here with all of you. Finally, I had some technical difficulties. I'm sure that's not unknown to any of you, particularly after 2 very busy days at the pre-summit. But anyway, I'm here. Thank you. I was really delighted to speak about what is this kind of unsexy subject of evaluation, because it is so incredibly important and fundamental. But it made me reflect a little bit with regards to my experience as a public servant in evaluation. It's a bad word, you know. It's the place where people go to the purgatory in many of our departments, and it's certainly not embraced by those that are the subject of evaluation. And yet, you know, it's, as I said, so incredibly important. It's like trying to build a house, and you haven't done the environmental assessment, and you know, you wonder why 6 months later it falls down and who's to blame. So I just wanted to say how important tonight's discussion is, and I'll be very interested in hearing as well how you're going to move forward with these 9 lessons. You know, money's finite. We've talked about money ad nauseum for the last 2 days, and it's in short supply and high demand, and evaluation makes sure that we're able to invest effectively and with good returns. So I just wanted to celebrate that important work that's being done by the evaluation offices and the Rome agencies and CGIAR. And I looked at those 9 lessons. I came in just a little bit late in your presentation, but I thought that most of them really applied to our gender programming. As you know, we've had a international feminist policy for almost 5 years now, and it's starting to really, I think, yield some important findings on how to invest our funding most effectively in really trying to have impact on gender equality. You know, I don't have to tell this audience how important women are as actors in the agricultural food sectors, and yet we also know that despite the fact that they produce probably upwards of 50% of the world's food supply, they continue not to benefit from their work to a large degree. And these are the barriers that we're trying to address through the Feminist International Assistance Policy. I'll just take 2 examples from the many, many lessons that you put forward today. Lesson 3, you mentioned understand local gender needs and target accordingly. And, you know, we went into this thinking that we knew most of the barriers to women's productivity in rural areas: education, lack of access to credit, in services, land tenure, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing I don't think we had fully anticipated was the impact of unpaid work. Girls and women are responsible for a disproportionate amount of unpaid care work in the home and in the community, and they therefore have less time to engage in paid labor market. They have less time for training and education, or even, as I said, to rest. And this creates obviously a vicious cycle. So we've really identified that one of the key barriers is to face and pay for unpaid care work, to enable their meaningful participation in economic activities. And so I guess one thing I would ask moving forward, that we're really looking for more data on unpaid work, and ensuring, as you said already, a participatory approach to the design and implementation of programming that will take these into consideration. Not doing so will risk the effectiveness of all of our programming. I would say that we're putting money where our mouth is, and we've put $100 million into the Equality Forum. This is a new funding for a standalone programming to address unpaid work in countries in which Canada provides international assistance. So we really hope that that will generate new findings and new solutions and new approaches. And then just one last one, lesson 4, move from equal participation to engaged decision-making. And I thought you spoke very well to that, Alison. You know, this is another central element of Canada's feminist approach, and that is the prioritization of women's voices and leadership as an accelerator of change, particularly at the local level. And evidence has shown that recognizing and building the capacity of women and women's rights organizations to inform and to influence decisions related not only to food systems, but also to wider issues that impact their lives can bring about real transformative change. So as a result, Canada has established the Equality Fund, and that fund is an innovative global platform that's bringing together government as well as philanthropic, private sector, and civil society actors to mobilize sustainable funding, including through gender lens investing. It's providing grants and technical support directly to women's organizations and movements in developing countries, in particular in support of rural women. So I'll end on that. I think the Food Summit's a great opportunity to really take these lessons learned and to actually drive them in a cross-cutting way across all of the action tracks. And I look forward to hearing more from our participants tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, for kicking us off with the remarks, for joining us, for overcoming technical difficulties as well. Great to have you here. And the evident and strong commitment of the Government of Canada to the topic of gender equality, as well as to the topic of using evidence from evaluations, is really welcomed and very highly appreciated. So thanks again for joining us and for your remarks. I'm pleased now to pass the microphone to Ms. Jette Mikkelsen, who is a Deputy Permanent Representative of Denmark to the Rome-based agencies. Feel free to come off of mute, Ms. Mikkelsen.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thank you for an excellent paper to Dr. Julia Betts. Denmark is committed to advance women's empowerment, and indeed so in the context of food summits. Food systems, sorry. We welcome the use of evaluations for lessons learned, and we see that there is indeed a rich material from CGIAR, FAO, IFAD, and WFP, as well as interagency evaluations, which we find is really valuable. So we commend this joint approach by the agencies. We believe that you start with the right question. What does a transformative approach mean in practice? And you have identified 9 solutions, but I do not think that they are really solutions in themselves. They are a kind of guidance that would lead eventually to solutions in the particular context. And I think this is also a little bit a symptom of how we deal with gender analysis, gender programming. I believe we do need to go beyond gender analysis. Evidence, measuring, mapping, gender disaggregated data, monitoring, they are of course crucial tools in order to inform programming. But on the other hand, we see that there is a lack of concrete best practices, and this is striking. Very often we have a kind of piecemeal best practices, but it's very difficult to share best practices among countries, and it's very difficult to scale up. And I believe this is an area where especially the UN agencies really need to strengthen their efforts at country level. So what will be important here? As Denmark will see it, it is above all the question of national and local ownership. And you mentioned a number of issues that are really important. It's changing social norms, building normative frameworks, and some of your issues also touch upon national legislation. And I think these suggestions just underline that we do not get very far if we do not have the involvement of national and local actors. There's somebody who's
Colleagues, may I ask if you are not speaking, please put yourselves on mute and invite Ms. Mikkelsen, please feel free to unmute and come back to the floor. I do apologize. So please all, if you could keep mute on unless you're speaking.
Thank you very much, Alison. So the importance of national and local ownership, and I was saying that your solutions or your guidance towards solution very much focus on changing social norms, building normative frameworks and national legislation. So here the national local actors are really key. Innovative partnerships is also key. Denmark is very focused on seeing that we can, through our development cooperation, strengthen localization. And what does that mean? It means seeing through our lenses more collaboration with women-led organizations, with civil society organizations. And I think the paper also very adeptly recommends building alliances around gender, food security, access to sexual and reproductive health. So a multi-sectorial approach, this is something that Denmark has been supporting, for instance, through WFP, but also through other agencies. And we think this is really necessary, not just the UN working on its own, but together with civil society organizations. Then the issue of resourcing. Clearly, my Canadian colleague touched upon the importance of this, but it is not enough to resource at global levels. We need to find resourcing at country level, and there's really a change to be done. And then looking at how agencies work, we would also like to see more systematic integration of women empowerment, gender-sensitive programming into the joint needs assessment. So this is about agencies coming together, and we believe this is essential in view of scaling up building capacity at national and local level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mikkelsen, for these wonderful points. I hear this clarion call for good practice case studies and for the local ownership of solutions. We really appreciate the time and joining the session tonight with these remarks that are so insightful. Thank you. I'd now like to invite to take the floor Her Excellency, Ms. Celine Jurgensen, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of France to the United Nations in Rome. Your Excellency, please feel free to turn on your camera and unmute.
Thank you very much, Alison, and good evening, all colleagues. Very pleased to be here today with all of you. And very thank you also to Julia Betts for presenting the results of the evaluation, which are very important and very interesting also, and very much in line with what we are pushing, promoting, and doing. As you all said, realizing gender equality within food system is crucial to achieve sustainable development goals by 2030 and also beyond, because our future is not 2030, it's really going beyond. And we all know the assessment, and you recall it. Whereas women are key actors in every part of the food chains, are farmers, entrepreneurs, processors, traders, and consumers, systematic gender inequalities remain, leading women's contribution to be often undervalued, unpaid, as Alexandra said that, and overlooked. They are also disproportionately exposed to the negative impact of climate change on agriculture and fisheries, and we saw that at the last COFI. Women and girls are also the first victims of food insecurity and several forms of malnutrition. They are also the first victims of conflict. And of course, the COVID has exacerbated all these existing inequalities. So what do we need? And again, the evaluation has a very clear feuille de route. Let me highlight a few points of view from French experience. So 3 key areas in our view are key with regard to a food system for gender equality. And I would also say for women's rights, because it's not only about gender equality, it's a larger issue. First, in order to improve the food security and nutrition for women and girls, France is adopting an integrated and multi-sectoral approach, beginning and focusing with education. And this was one of the lessons that you mentioned. For example, France is actively promoting and supporting WFP efforts to create a school meals coalition. School and nutrition are both critical to every child for them to learn and thrive. Evidence shows that school meals have positive effects on girls' schooling and thereby on their own development, but also on overall economic development of the country and nutrition of households. So please join us tomorrow at 9 at the Food Systems Summit to push for the coalition on school meals. Thank you. Second, France is also very much committed to fighting against discrimination faced by women and girls through mainstreaming approach within our official development aid policy, but also more largely a feminist policy, which President Macron is very much promoting. France committed to ensure that 50% of its ODA includes an objective to reduce gender inequality. Concretely, within food systems, women face more hurdles in accessing to land, natural, financial, and technical resource, as well as education and training. So empowering women on these aspects, among others, but also being scientists, recognize that they are not only suffering from the current situation within the food system, but that they are also powerful agents of change to achieve sustainable food system, adaptation and mitigation of climate change, and reduction of biodiversity loss. So we look, for example, as agroecology as a particularly relevant and powerful path for that. Thirdly, France's actions aims at empowering women by integrating them better in governance instance and decision-making processes. And the Generation Equality Forum, co-organized by UN Women, Mexico, and France, which took place in Paris just a month ago, placed at its core women farmers, scientists, youth, and activists. One of the action coalition is actually focused on women action for climate justice. And regarding food system, this is very important because women often hold specific and precious traditional knowledge. So lastly, France supports the future negotiation within the Committee on World Food Security to achieve voluntary guidelines on gender equality and women's empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition. So to conclude, we collectively have a long way, of course, to go and many obstacles to overcome within food systems to build gender equality and achieve respect for women's rights. Gender equality for women is not only on 8 March, it is every day that we have to work to that objective. And in that regard, we must deliver a very strong signal in September during the next Food System Summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The pledge by the government of France to direct 50% of assistance towards projects with gender at the core, I think is very inspiring. I'm sure for everybody on the call. And also, I hope that everyone took note of the invitation tomorrow at 9 o'clock to your event. Thank you for making everyone aware of it. Very well, thanks. I'm going to move on to another wonderful guest who's willing to speak this evening, Ms. Maria de los Angeles Gomez Aguilar, alternate representative of Mexico to the Rome-based agencies. Ms. Gomez Aguilar, feel free to take yourself off of mute and turn on your camera. And as she's doing that, colleagues, we're probably running about 5 minutes behind schedule. We have a rich array also of civil society organization speakers that who would like to take the floor in a few moments. So if anyone who can stay on for an extra 5 minutes at the end, please do so.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this event. I will also take this opportunity to reiterate Mexico's commitment to this fundamental issue in the food systems and share with you that recently, as Ambassador France mentioned it, took place the Generation Equality Forum, had its first stop in Mexico City in March, prior to the second phase in Paris, France in June. The Generation Equality Forum made history in Mexico for the mobilization of high-level commitments, for constituting a genuine space for inclusive participation of the different sectors of society, for the relevant participation of the indigenous women, and for adopting the difference as a fundamental value and engine of transformative change. Mexico has remarked a historic root on the feminist agenda, with young people in their diversity at the center. The forum resulted in a strengthened feminist path that promises a world in which women and girls can reclaim their power and realize their rights. Also, like Canada, Mexico is embracing in a feminist foreign policy. Getting back to the report represented today, generally speaking, policies adopted to close the gap between opportunities for women and men have been oriented towards the empowerment of women, which has probably not been enough to close this gap. We have learned how in some cases they have had unexpected results only to increase the already burdened obligations for women. Women in many cases have entered into the conventionally men's world. The pending task is that men fully enter into the conventionally women's world. The concept seems very simple, but becomes complex when trying to land it. It implies many measures at all levels. Societies, governments, organizations must convene on this purpose in the design of intersectoral public policies that favor this transition. Also, what experience has shown us is that the achievement made so far has been isolated or atomized because they are not holistically approached. This makes it very difficult to quantify the actual results in the efforts to close gender gaps. Today's interventions illustrates very well that there are not prescriptive approaches to arrive at scenarios in which we, women, can fully develop our potential. The food system is the world may have similar bases, but not necessarily the same ones. There are cultural aspects, environmental and political conditions, different creeds that prevent the full implementation of policies. These particularities must be taken into account when designing policies and programs. Food systems is a matter in which the three agencies in Rome have, with different scope and approaches, a fundamental role to play. For this reason, I see this great opportunity coming with the RBA's commitment and involvement in the development of the voluntary guidelines on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls in the context of food security and nutrition with the Committee of Food Security. We have to be careful that these guidelines will not result in isolated recommendations or target only women and girls. Rather, they have to be oriented towards clear equality objectives, avoiding efforts that may fall short from the final goal. We are talking here of mainstreaming gender in all works. Finally, it is essential to create follow-up measures that truly allow us to evaluate the impact of the implementation of public policies. There is no other way to know if we're reaching our aspirational goals. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Ms. Gomez Aguilar, for these really welcome and strong words about gender mainstreaming and the importance of evaluating the work that's been done. We thank you so much for bringing these comments to the floor this evening. Thank you, Your Excellencies. Seeing such diplomatic commitment to gender equality and use of evidence from evaluations at this session is an inspiration for all of us. We are now delighted to have distinguished guests from civil society and research spheres share their impressions of the report. I would like to begin by inviting Ms. Saadia Hamdani, Director of Gender and Inclusion at Plan International Canada, to take the floor. Ms. Hamdani, feel free to turn on your video and come off of mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, there was a bit of a technical challenge in trying to unmute myself. From Plan International Canada's side, we absolutely welcome and absolutely agree with each and every one of the learnings and recommendations made in the evaluation. As an organization that has been working for the past 85 years in 80 countries around the world, and as practitioners that are committed to the promotion of gender equality and the rights of women and girls in all their diversity, and through the application over decades of our rights-based ecological theory of change, which is gender transformative, we always talk about the criticality, and this evaluation certainly brings it out as well. The absolute criticality of setting gender equality as an objective in and of itself, as well as a pathway to sector outcomes, and including food security. We also feel that, once those objectives and those results are set, that commensurate indicators are also set, so that it's not just an end evaluation, but a consistent monitoring of results as we go along our programming. And as Madame Mikkelsen also stressed, that it's not just an end evaluation. Within that, we would say and suggest from our point of view that gender equality is not just about this, that, and the other, the siloed approach that we have been talking about, but must look at least 5 core domains or dimensions of change, which are so important, such as access to and control over resources, and we've talked about that, as well as the critical gender distribution of productive, reproductive, and volunteer labor, or which absolutely is a barrier for women to make any headway in any sector, but particularly in food security. Autonomous or joint decision making, not only in the public sphere, in governance committees and this and that, but also at the household level in all matters that affect their lives, not just in relation to this, that, or the other, if it's education or health or food security, but across the board. And within decision-making, we speak to the importance of presence, voice, as well as leadership. The combination of that all. Of course, broader social norm change as well as harmful gender norms, etc., have been stated and are completely self-evident, but also changes in normative policy and systemic responsiveness to gender equality. We feel that none of these variables are more important than the other, but the combination of them provide a picture of transformative change that we at Plan International Canada aggregate into an index that we call the Women and Girls Empowerment Index, which we apply across all our programming. And we feel that those indicators and that index needs to be looked at from baseline to midline to endline and evaluation. We also feel that given the complexity and nature of gender equality changes and transformative change, both qualitative and quantitative measures are absolutely critical within a sound and robust M&E system, which is critical for measuring the quality of our work and the impacts of our work. We strongly believe as an organization that whenever indicators or any kind of evaluation mechanism is set, that the definitions of those are locally relevant and contextualized in co-creation with women and girls on ground, as opposed to us people sitting somewhere up in space and defining things for people or where they need to get. Finally, just two considerations which we feel the evaluation has touched upon, but could be stronger. The gross and the chronic mismatch between stated commitments of organizations and the resource allocation to those commitments. That is a big one. I know there is a crunch in terms of funding and there's a lot of demand, but if we're serious about making headway in food security, then gender inequality has to be tackled head on. Otherwise, outcomes within that will not be optimal. So particularly with regard to, yes, we'll set targets, we'll set objectives, indicators, etc., but the capacity building of individuals who program and monitor and evaluate is equally critical. And finally, we as an organization have learned over decades of programming that gender transformative change is a long-term endeavor, my colleagues. It requires deep dive engagement with women and girls, as well as power holders in households and communities, as well as governments, as well as working with larger civil society. And shorter term programs, whereas are not ideal for transformative change, but in our experience, they are very well suited to start the groundwork towards contributing towards that transformative change. Given that food security programming is generally cited within either humanitarian assistance, increasingly in Nexus, as well as development assistance, we feel that the targets and the objectives, as well as the indicators, as well as the systems and processes be set in feasible and realistic ways over the spectrum of these programmings, gradually and incrementally building towards the higher levels of change. A one-size-fits-all solution will likely not be very, very effective. On that note, I mean, I congratulate Julia Betts, Dr. Julia Betts, for this fantastic evaluation. And like my predecessors, I hope that this evaluation doesn't get shelved and doesn't become implemented in siloed ways. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Hamdani. Also for bringing attention to this issue of it. This is a long haul. This is not a short-term type of approach. Colleagues, we would like to invite two other interventions from the floor. Please do try to stay on for a couple of extra minutes because we have a little treat at the end of the session. I'd like to move next to Ms. Maureen Munjua, who is the country representative of Tanager in Kenya. Ms. Munjua, please feel free to come off of mute, turn on your video. We'll be happy to hear your remarks.
Can you hear me? Great. I really want to thank you all, and it's a pleasure to join you all today on this very important dialogue from Nairobi. As Alison mentioned, I am the country representative of Tanaja in Kenya. Tanaja is an organization that has been working at that intersection point between gender, nutrition, and agriculture. We are headquartered in the US, but have country offices in Kenya working in East Africa, and in Burkina Faso working in West Africa, as well as India. In Kenya, I'm leading a project that aims at strengthening institutional capacity of African agriculture institutions to basically contribute to achieving gender equality in their own sphere of influence and improving nutrition through technical assistance. The program that we are leading is Ignite. It's purely a technical assistance and capacity building program. And reading this report, you know, all the 9 lessons really resonated a lot with what we are doing as Tanaja within our work. But 3 of those 9 lessons resonated very closely to the current project, Ignite, that we are working with around 15 African institutions across 4 countries, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso. Lesson 1 particularly was interesting. I would advocate that in addition to, you know, government policies and structures, each organization, be it a business, be it an NGO, a government entity, civil society, can examine its own internal policies, structures, and procedures, and sort of start asking yourselves the question of what is your DNA as an organization, and what is your commitment internally to your staff, to your leadership, to your boards, and externally to your partners and stakeholders when it comes to gender equality, when it comes to women's empowerment or improving nutrition. We believe that each organization has a footprint, and this footprint we can leverage to quickly scale up our individual and collective responsibility and commitment to improving nutrition and gender equality. Lesson 7 was really at the heart of Tanaja's work, building institutional capacities for the long haul, for gender mainstreaming and improving nutrition. Through programs like Ignite, we are supporting organizations to evaluate their own organizational capacity. Sort of knowing where you are, it guides you to see where you need to go. So with our partners, we are working to identify those opportunities within their organizations and creating strategies and developing tools and resources where they can use those to advance gender mainstreaming and integrate more within also their own institutional structures, their programming, their interventions, and their business model. And Ignite is working with the full range of private sector organizations in the sector, government, as well as NGOs. And what we found is that institutions sometimes know what they need to get done, but don't always know the how or have the necessary tools and resources. And this is where technical assistance really comes in to fill in the gaps. And as Sadia just mentioned, this requires patient capital. Change takes time, and it needs consistency and building on your successes, but also learning from your failures. Yeah. So investing in the long term on technical assistance for institutions to work within the food system is really the best way to start transforming the food systems in the future. Lastly, as I keep saying, if it's not measured, then it's not getting done. And if it's not getting done, then it's not important. So in line with lesson 8, institutions have to be just deliberate to design for gender. Gender is no longer a cross-cutting issue. It really needs to be at the core of design, at the core of implementation. Then it really gets measured, to be able to just measure that meaningful change. So aim going beyond the quantitative, the end evaluations and baseline and midline, to really also capture qualitative insights along that journey of measuring change, to start demonstrating that institutional behavior change. Because we also need to start looking at behavior change. How is that institutional change behavior change at institutional level trickling down at that household or community level impact that we are aiming for? So as stakeholders, really starting to be bold about what is it we want to measure, but also the change that we want to see. And as I always say, it's going beyond the reach. It's aiming for benefit, and it's aiming for empowerment for women and girls and the community at large. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those great remarks. It's wonderful hearing about the work of Tanager as well. And I think the evaluation community can really embrace this concept of the need for measurement and evidence that comes from evaluations. So I would finally like to invite Mr. Bella Tiken from the CGIAR Center, the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, with its headquarters in Nigeria. Mr. Tiken, the floor is yours. Feel free to turn on your camera, come off of mute, and share some remarks and reactions from the research sphere into this discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been listening with great joy to the discussions. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to relate to the presented paper. And I read it with great interest, and I was very happy to see the many very crucial and topical gender aspects summarized nicely together in a very accessible document. And I think that is very useful. And I will mainly focus on lessons 1, 3, 4, and 9, that is the changing structures, understand local gender needs, and move to decision-making and build alliances. So many gender social science approaches have focused on trying to directly address and change gender norms and values. This is important for addressing gender relations and empowering women. But such initiatives can also dilute on higher levels and can fail to have a concrete impact on the rural livelihoods and thus fail to empower disadvantaged groups of women or men from below, within the context that they are dependent on. That is why gender research in IFAD sees the shift that is proposed in the paper, the shift from addressing symptoms to addressing root causes, as a need to focus on participatory redesign of the so-called hardware and procedures of all the involved disciplines, and especially the biophysical and technical sciences, which provide many technologies of IFAD. Changing such structures can provide real opportunities for improved gender equality. So we put a lot of effort in generating evidence to promote such structural change in favor of gender. So I will provide some examples of the work that I'm mainly involved in that illustrates the link to the biophysical science. So in cassava breeding in Nigeria, we are working to integrate root preferences of men and women, farmers and processors from different social segments into standard breeding templates that define the kind of users that are targeted, and that also define the variety traits that are focused on, which relates to lesson 3. And processors in Nigeria are mostly women and prioritize food product quality more. So public demand-led breeding has a clear social impact. So structural changes within breeding will have to be made for real gender responsive impact. So with the CGIAR Roots, Tubers and Banana Research Program, we have developed a so-called G2 Plus toolbox to initiate this change. Furthermore, we are working with farmers to a citizen science approach, which relates to lesson 4. We target men and women from different social segments in Nigeria to participate in large-scale participatory variety selection and participatory processing of food products, combined with social surveys to allow for intersectional data interpretation. Furthermore, we are working to link these data directly to breeding databases such as BreedBase and Brably. So here, gender is no longer a matter of social science only, but something that will have to be integrated in the technicalities and procedures of technical and biophysical sciences. This implies taking a multidisciplinary social outcome-focused approach, where gender is not standing apart as a separate field, but is fully integrated on different levels, including the CGIAR, the National Breeding Program, the Variety Release Committees, and the communities of farmers and processors and consumers. This importantly touches on lesson 9 of the presented paper that stresses the integration of gender on different levels and creates very much important ownership of gender issues by all stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Tiken. It's wonderful to hear about this work in breeding programs to really take into account the different needs of women and men in breeding programs. I want to thank everyone again. all during these excellent remarks, we've seen, of course, an incredible wealth of comments coming in on the chat thread. I hope some of you have had a chance to look at them. We for sure are going to be looking very, very carefully at all of those comments, and we wish that we had more time, but without further ado, I would like to hand over now. It's my pleasure to pass the virtual microphone to Andrea Cook, the World Food Programme Director of Evaluation. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alison. Distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends, it's truly heartening to see such an attendance, such passion and engagement today. And it's been a real pleasure to hear your valuable insights and reflections. As we've heard today, gender equality and women's empowerment is a game changer, a crosscutter, a catalyst, at the core. However you describe it, activities that support gender equality and women's empowerment can spur progress towards all other sustainable development goals. Not only will its achievement improve nutrition, health and education outcomes for women, men, girls and boys, but it will also bring wider benefits for families, communities and nations. Many have observed that COVID-19 offers an opportunity to reset, and the pandemic's socioeconomic consequences demand that we address gender equality in a transformative way, and in a way that ensures that this is sustainable and that it is durable. There are three interconnected areas of the summary paper and from your insights that I'd like to focus on in these concluding remarks. Firstly, is the evidence that empowering women also empowers and benefits men. There are no losers with gender equality, and there's no greater generator for synergies across the SDGs. Men as well as women can be agents of change. From this, the second observation is the importance of going beyond addressing symptoms to truly tackling the root causes of gender equality. This means equal access to land, to finance, to technology, to participation and agency for women. And for all, but especially so for those with very little access, who are largely poor rural people, farmers and food producers. And thirdly, to look to transformation, this word that seems to dominate our discourse. Never has it had more meaning than when applied to gender equality and women's empowerment. And the lesson we have learned is that to really make a difference, we must challenge traditional power relations in order to break through conventional roles and stereotypes. On behalf of CGIAR, FAO, IFAD and WFP, I would like to thank you all for engaging in today's event, and I hope that the lessons presented today will inform you in your future work and interactions. I believe we all recognise the power of evidence and lessons learned from evaluations, which can light the path to zero hunger and gender equality. It is time that concrete evaluative evidence is firmly placed on the Food Systems Summit map. We see and hear a clear desire to continue the conversation, moving forwards into the summit, and I do hope that we will have the opportunity to engage on this important subject again. As the very final act of today's event, we would like to play a short video highlighting the 9 lessons. And with this, thank you and goodbye to everyone.